Tattoo Traditions is a podcast dedicated to the history of tattooing and those that have made significant contributions towards it. This month we got to talk to one of tattooing's true originals, Jonathan Shaw. Born in New York but raised in Los Angeles, Jonathan had a huge range of artistic influences from very early on. He began writing as his self-expression, and it was only when he found himself at a dockyard in Mexico that his journey into tattooing really begun. Jonathan's career has seen him open the infamous Fun City in New York, write books, travel the world and influence famous movie characters. The documentary about his life, Scab Vendor, Confessions of a Tattoo Artist, is officially released in theatres in June. Check his social media for more details. Okay, cool. Thanks so much for doing this, mate. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, it's been a
cool.
good hang.
I feel like I've been reading about you for a long time and stuff. It's nice to meet the man behind those words.
Well, it's been a good hang so far. So we had a good, nice dinner and a nice hang.
So with these, Jonathan, it's nice to start your earliest memory of a tattoo. So do you have an early memory of seeing a tattoo when you were younger?
Yeah, I mean, once again, I'm going to probably be referring back to my book, Scab Vendor, Confessions of a Tattoo Artist, because in there I really went through my life with a fine-tooth comb, and there's a whole chapter in there about, my first time seeing a tattoo was actually, I was born in New York. My parents split up when I was an infant, and my mother brought me out to LA, to Hollywood. She was a up-and-coming actress, and so she moved to Hollywood, and I just remember coming downtown when I was about maybe 5 or 6 years old. I used to come downtown with my grandmother, who was like an old, like an old Irish lady, very sort of, shanty Irish, and she'd bring me downtown LA to go to this place, Clifton's Cafeteria, which is down here, real traditional, old school, place. And I remember, just sort of being, in my grandmother's, sort of little world, coming downtown on the bus and walking through these busy streets and, seeing all these different things, because, we lived in like a suburb of, Hollywood, Beverly Hills, that sort of thing. This was back in the, in the 50s.
Yeah.
And then being in downtown LA with bustling streets and people walking, and it was unheard of. It was like a whole magical world, and looking into shop windows and seeing all these glittering, colorful little, odds and ends and things. And it was like a real eye-opener for like a young kid.
Yeah.
And then we walked past a tattoo shop. And at some point, I remember my grandmother being like, going into the cafeteria, and we're ordering food, and she turned her back, and I snuck out of the cafeteria and ran back out onto the street and turned a corner, and there was this tattoo shop with all these crazy little drawings in the window and stuff, all these magical little colorful icons. And I just remember staring in that window just like awestruck and fascinated by all these little drawings, and sort of like I was standing out there like, wow, this is a whole magical little world. And I remember seeing there was like guys in the back, like tattooed old sailors and guys like that, and I was just like fascinated by the whole thing. And at that moment, that was like kind of a, looking back from, now, like 70 years later, it's like, that was a defining moment in my destiny, but I didn't know it, of course, until much later.
Yeah.
And I just remember standing there looking at all this stuff and just being entranced by the whole mystique of it, whatever that magical little portal into a different, reality. And then suddenly my grandma, hey, where have you been? Come on, and just grabbing me by the fucking arm and dragging me all off, and I was like, wow, okay. But that was probably my first time actually seeing tattoos or having any awareness that such a thing ever existed. And then, of course, that just got buried in the in the
Yeah.
back rooms of my memory for many, many years. But then later on, when, circumstances led me into this strange world again back in the 70s, suddenly, I was like, oh, this was part of the roadmap,
Destiny, yeah, totally.
yeah.
Did you see tattooed people when you moved here from New York?
Nah,
No.
there was no such thing. That's
Right.
why it made such an impression on me,
Cool.
because I was a kid.
Yeah.
And then even growing up, on the, I took to the streets at a very young age. Like, I grew up in a kind of a fancy, sort of Hollywood elite. My mother was kind of a movie star, and my father was an iconic, famous jazz musician. And, so there was, in my home of origin, there was all these fancy Hollywood people coming around, all the time. I mean, Marilyn Monroe, Marlon Brando. I grew up, Cary Grant, Tony Curtis. I grew up in the middle of these kind of people, but it was a really super dysfunctional atmosphere because my mother was a fucking raging alcoholic and a drug addict, but always kept a very good, appearance on the outside. But it was like growing up in hell. I mean, there was suicide attempts. There was, horrible, violent, crazy shit going on behind these whitewashed closed doors. So, by the time I was 14, I was running with a gang of kids from similar backgrounds, and we just took to the streets and run amok in Hollywood in the early 60s, through the mid 60s. And, we were hanging out with, the likes of Jim Morrison. And we were like the little mascot rebel kids, hanging out on the sidelines of like what was to become, sort of 60s culture. But anyway, so I took to the streets real early. And at that time, there was still really no real tattoo consciousness in that reality. It was just sex, drugs, lots of sex, lots of drugs, lots of rock and roll, lots of delinquent, sort of antisocial, adventures and craziness. And, growing up in Hollywood in the middle of the fucking, 60s cultural revolution and everything. But there was not a lot of consciousness. There was not aware of tattoos. I didn't see it in that realm at all. It was not even a thing, really, until a bit later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Until what, you started to enter your teenage years, would you say?
In my teenage years, it was still no tattooing. It was just lots of drugs, lots of sex, lots of adventures, lots of everything. But what happened was I, wound up getting way deep into the drug culture. And, 16 years old. By the time I was 16, 17 years old, I was strung out like a fucking, lab rat on heroin and everything else. And I was a little teenage junkie, like most of my friends were in that situation. And, it got so bad that my world became reduced to this little, 10 by 10 rented room in a rooming house on the ass end of Hollywood, real ghetto style thing. And my whole life was just about getting drugs, getting back to that room, getting high, and just nodding out. And I started writing a lot. I was writing stuff. I was writing a lot of poetry and a lot of crazy, just delirious ramblings. And I eventually, actually, even in that junkified, drug-addicted state, I did manage to publish a couple things in a newspaper that was kind of the counterculture, thing back in the day. And it was Charles Bukowski had a column in that thing, and I wound up meeting him and getting to know him and befriending him, and vice versa. But there was still nothing to do with tattooing at the time. And then eventually what happened was I got so went so far down the depths of drug addiction that really I didn't leave that room for like a year, except to go out and do whatever I had to do to beg, borrow, and steal to get more drugs. And then it was just back to the room, and all I did was just get high and write.
Okay.
And get it was a decrepit existence until I hit
your creative outlet was writing, not painting and drawing.
Not drawing, not painting. Even though I did a bit of that, but it was never the thing. I was a writer.
Nice.
Wannabe writer. I just was a scribbler, basically, and delirious rants. Which later, many decades later, I went back and sort of resurrected some of this stuff and edited it and put it into little bits and pieces of my current literary works. Like my memoir, Scavenger Confessions of a Tattoo Artist. The first volume just basically, it's like a 5-volume series. The first volume doesn't even get into tattooing, except for a few of those early childhood memories. But then the second, there's a bit of tattooing, yeah. Anyway, but so what happened was by the time I was like 18 years old, I was at death's door. All my friends were dying of overdoses. And I had this epiphany. I had to get out of fucking Hollywood. I'd been reading Jack Kerouac at the time on the road, and that was kind of like my that sort of firmed my dream of just going. And so at one point, I just kicked drugs in this dirty little room and sweated out the dope demons, for a few days, cold turkey. And then as soon as I was able to stand up, I literally packed a little overnight bag with, a change of underwear, a pair of socks, whatever meager belongings I had, and a couple $100 that I'd saved by not buying drugs for, a few days. And I just picked up that bag, walked down to the fucking freeway entrance, stuck out my thumb, and just took off into the world, destination unknown, no past, no future. Ended up in Mexico, hitchhiked around Mexico for a couple of years. And I wound up in the port of Veracruz, which is like an old seaport in Mexico, on the Gulf Coast, tropical place. And in that seaport, I literally lived in a cheap hotel right across the street from the port. And in the port, there were ships coming and going from all over the world. And I started hanging out on the docks, looking for work on a ship. I wanted to be a sailor. I wanted to sail off into wherever. Yeah. And actually, I wanted to go to Brazil. For some reason, I had it in my head that I wanted to move to Brazil. Yeah. And anyway, in that life there, living on the docks in this cheap hotel across from the port, and meeting sailors from all over the world every day, and stevedores, and just the real dockside Mexico. And I started seeing tattoos on these guys. I started seeing tattoos, and I wound up tattooing a Mexican sailor by hand poking it. He actually taught me how to, put some needles together and hand poke a tattoo. And we sat up in my hotel room one day and we tattooed each other. I did like an anchor on him with some words, and he did a little thing on me, another anchor, and it was all hand poked. And that was because I've been seeing tattoos like every day. I mean, real tattoos, like colorful professional tattoos on sailors from Europe, from US, from South America. And, but we were like hand poking these things, just fucking around. But suddenly I became obsessed with the idea that, wow, someday I want to learn how to make these real tattoos. Eventually I did get to Brazil. I got work on a ship and, traveled around as a sailor for, as a merchant seaman, whatever, just a deckhand on a Liberian freighter. And in that incarnation, we visited different ports and different places before I jumped ship in Brazil. By then I was probably close to 20. And I'd seen a lot of tattoos at that point. And my goal was to get to Brazil and somehow learn to tattoo. And at that point, I was kind of obsessed with the idea. I thought, well, I'm a traveling man. I got no home. I got no past, no future. How am I going to support myself, once I get off this ship? How am I going to fucking live? And I thought, well, if I could learn to tattoo, I could, travel around and make tattoos on people and, be sort of like this, rootless vagabond, tradesman in this thing. And, back then tattooing was not a thing. No. It was not in any way shape or form a part of, polite society. I mean, if you had tattoos, you were a fucking scumbag or a criminal or some kind of marginal, type that, was not, it was not anything like it is today. It was the mark of the fucking beast, it was not, it was frowned upon in most circles, except, real like dockside working class situations or military situations or, the criminal underworld. And, and I was in with all of those segments of society, and tattooing became kind of like an intention and a goal, and through, a fortuitous confluence of circumstances, I sort of eased into the thing. I was attracted to lifestyle, and I did, I always appreciated art, and I doodled and drew a bit as a kid. I used to do comic strips and things, kind of reminded me of the piece that you showed me of, your artwork there.
Cartoon,
I used to do that kind of stuff when I was like 14, 15 years old. I loved it.
Yeah.
I was obsessed with comic books as a kid. I used to love all the old comic books, and, I'd replicate these things in my bedroom, and, so I had that background that so it came easy to me to work with images. And when I started tattooing, it was very primitive stuff. I mean, it was very, what was on board in the tattoo iconography at the time was, a very limited set of, what was tattooable,
Sure.
So it was panthers and, dragons and naked ladies and pinups and, all the usual stuff, military emblems, all that.
When was this? Sorry, when were you doing like that? So you went to Brazil.
I went to Brazil, and I met a guy, and we started. He was also wanted to be a tattoo. I met a couple guys, and they were all, we were in our early 20s, and we were living in the sort of working class outskirts of Rio de Janeiro, and we were all kind of wanting to learn to be tattoo artists. There was no such thing in Brazil. I mean, if tattooing was frowned upon in, Western society, in Brazil, it was like the mark of the devil. Like if you had a tattoo in Brazil, the cops would take you, and throw you in jail just for being tattooed.
Yeah.
And especially during that time in Brazil, it was a military dictatorship. Things were very tight.
Is this the 70s?
Yeah, this was the early 70s. Cool. And so I met these guys. One guy actually turned out, became later one of the founding members of the Hells Angels motorcycle club in Brazil. Oh, wow. And we're still, really great friends to this day. And another guy was, he's, iconic tattoo artist to this day, now lives in Miami, Luis Segato. And, I got in with these guys early, and, especially with Luis, we started, playing around with building like rudimentary jailhouse style machines, and, crushing up stuff to make ink. And, we started playing around, experimenting with each, tattooing. And then
you couldn't go and ask anyone, could you?
No, there was no such thing in Brazil. There was one traditional tattoo artist that actually existed, a real bona fide tattoo artist that existed in Brazil. It was an old Scandinavian sailor who jumped ships in Brazil, and he was a relative of Tattoo Oli.
Okay.
And his name was he called himself Tattoo Lucky Tattoo. And he opened a fucking tattoo shop in the port of Santos in the south of Brazil, in the state of São Paulo. And he actually opened like a tattoo shop, on the dockside, where there was all hookers and sailors and, all that. Yeah. Real traditional thing. And and so he was kind of like our god, we'd go and, visit him and, sit at his feet. And he was a good guy.
Cool.
And, he kind of gave us a few tips here and there, and then we'd go back to our little hovels, and, play with machines, try to build stuff. And, there was, the most precious thing you could get would be like an American Spalding and Rogers tattoo catalog, because it had all those little drawings in the back.
Yeah.
The samples of the flash sheets that they sold, and we'd look at those things with a magnifying glass and be like, wow, and then we'd have to redraw them on paper, and, and then, transfer them onto the skin somehow or just draw them on people.
Yeah.
And so we were really starting in a super primitive way. We had to make our own needles, it was like a whole thing, and you couldn't get anything, we were buying sewing needles. I mean, it was a very primitive start, but we did do that, and we started tattooing people in the neighborhood, people were coming around getting little tattoos, and we're, starting to, feel like we're actually doing something, very scratchery, primitive kind of thing. But then at some point I was like, I kept remembering seeing all those fancy, professional tattoos that I'd see on the sailors.
Yeah.
Back in the day, working in Veracruz, on the docks. And I said, that's what I want to do. I want to learn how to make real tattoos.
Yeah.
How am I going to do that? I'm living in a vacuum here in Brazil. We're tattooing neighborhood kids. We suck. We don't really have any way to really get any better.
Yeah.
I want to do tattoos, and then I remembered suddenly out of the blue, I was like, wait a minute, I have an American passport.
Yeah.
I mean, I am American. At that point, I hadn't spoken a word of English for years. I was fully Brazilianized.
Yeah.
And then one day it just occurred to me, like in a flash, like, wait a minute, I got an American passport. I could go to the States. I could find one of these old tattoo guys that makes real tattoos and somehow, convince them to teach me or something.
That's where they're probably coming from.
Yeah. So I went down to the docks, and, every day would go to the shipyards in Rio de Janeiro and, show them my seaman's papers because I had worked on a ship. And eventually I got on a ship that was going north, and I managed to jump ship in the States in the port of Los Angeles in Long Beach.
Oh, wow.
And I remembered from being a teenager, there was a time when I was a teenager when I did make an early teenager, and me and some friends cut out of school and we took a bus and went down to the fucking Long Beach Pike. I forgot to mention that. As a 14-year-old kid, and there was all those tattoo shops in the amusement park on the Pike, and I remember seeing those places.
Yeah.
Forgot to mention that.
Yeah.
That was the only contact I really had with the thing. And then I remembered that years later in Brazil, and I said, okay, I'll go. And I managed to get on a ship, and I jumped ship in the port of Long Beach and went to the Pike. And, they abruptly chased me out of a bunch of tattoo shops, me going in there asking about, wanting to learn to tattoo or buy a tattoo machine or anything like that. They chased me out of there. Get the fuck out of here. We'll chop your fucking hands off. But I went to the Bert Grimm shop and I met Bob Shaw. And Bob Shaw took a liking to me for some reason. I told him a bit of my story, and, I was coming up from Brazil, and, interestingly enough, he had the same last name.
Yeah, maybe that was it a bit.
How was that? Well, it wound up, he kind of took me under his wing, and I wound up working, as an apprentice, which meant basically just mopping the floor, chasing drunks out of the place, going for cigarettes and beer, and in the meantime, until he had another mission for me to accomplish, I would stand at his elbow and watch him tattoo people.
Wow.
And he said, just watch.
Yeah.
Just watch. You can watch. And, hey, go get this guy a pack of cigarettes. And then I'd come back and I'd watch some more. And that went on for months. And one day he took me in the back room and started showing me how to work a tattoo machine, how to load the needles in, then one thing led to another. How to build needles, how to, cut springs, all the technical stuff, and mixing colors, all this. So I started my sort of unofficial apprenticeship under Bob Shaw at that time. And then he had another tattoo shop up on Hollywood Boulevard. And at one point, I started tattooing there under Bob. I had my own little shift, and I tattooed people, and I got in some trouble with some local bikers. I fucked somebody's girlfriend that I shouldn't have fucked, and these guys, were gonna fucking hurt me.
Right.
And I had to get out of there. And Bob said, he sent me up to the Hollywood Boulevard shop, and I worked in there, and I ran that place for a while. This was, I guess by then it was late 70s, early 80s, and I worked on Hollywood Boulevard for a while until I got to some other kind of trouble. I was a terrible alcoholic. I was always getting into, trouble of some sort.
Yeah.
I never went back to using hard drugs, but I was a heavy drinker and just a fucking, creator of confusion.
Yeah.
And so I don't remember exactly what the final straw was, but I stole somebody's motorcycle and had to get out of town and just packed up an overnight bag again. Seems to be a story of my life.
That's
And,
it, yeah.
some tattoo gear now, because now I was actually a bona fide tattoo artist.
By this point.
Yeah, and I got on the fucking motorcycle and, the stolen motorcycle, and rode across the border into Mexico, and off I went, and eventually, got rid of the bike in Mexico, sold it, made some money, and went back to Brazil. And that's when I started tattooing for real in Brazil.
Yeah.
And my colleagues there had also managed to sort of up their game, and things were starting to take off a little bit in Brazil. It was still very underground. There was only a few of us. But yeah, and then eventually, I got to a point of proficiency, I guess, to where I got sick of doing little small tattoos, and I decided I was going to come back to the States and get myself in a real tattoo shop and learn and get around some more experienced tattoo artists and start learning to sort of up my game. And that's kind of how it went. And, one thing led to another. Bob Shaw took me on again. He'd moved to Texas at that point.
Okay, yeah.
And he had two sons who were tattoo artists that went with him, and they opened a popular tattoo spot on one side of town in Houston, Texas. And then I guess he had some kind of falling out or misunderstanding with his sons, and they were feuding, and he said, "Fuck y'all." And he went and opened his own place across town, and it was just Bob Shaw's Tattoos.
Oh, wow.
And that's when he reached out to me and said, "Johnny, come and work with me."
Yeah.
So at that point I went to work with him, and it was me and the old man.
Oh, wow.
Me and Bob Shaw
You two.
tattooing side by side in a shop for, like a year and a half together. And that's when I really started learning.
Because it was just you two, so you could
It's just
really
me and
plug
Bob.
it in.
I mean, I slept at the back of the shop, and he'd come in around 10 in the morning every day and open the shop and wake, by then I'd be awake and, setting things up. And then it was me and him all day. We'd go out and have some breakfast, come back, work together. I learned so much working with that guy, and Bob was like a father to me. He was much more of a father than my real father had ever been. And we had the same name, and then he started taking me around the tattoo convention and introducing me to everybody as his nephew. He didn't dare call me his son, because his sons would have fucking murdered me.
Yeah.
They always hated me, but because they were jealous, because I was actually closer to the old man than they were.
Yeah.
And so everybody in the tattoo business, was introduced to me as Bob Shaw's nephew.
Yeah.
And then, when I started getting a little well known in the thing, people, all the haters come out of the woodwork, and they're like, "He's not his nephew. He's just going around telling people that." And it actually wasn't me. It was Bob who did that. And I'm like, sure, of course. I love this guy like a father, man. He taught me everything, And he was just a sweet man, just a fucking good, solid
You knew a
guy.
lot about machines as well, didn't he? He was quite good with machines.
He was a machine builder.
Yeah.
He was a machine technician. I mean, he came, he came up through Bert Grimm was his tattoo godfather.
Right.
And so, it was a tradition. Bert Grimm took Bob off the street and put him under his wing and taught him everything he knew. And then Bob picked up a guy like me and did the same thing for me. And then I went on to do that for, younger guys like Bob and, a few others. But that was the tradition. That was how it went. It was handed down from generation to generation like that. And that's how, we became tattoo artists. There was no, guide to tattooing. There was no tattoo school. There was no any sort of structuralized thing, So, that's how it went. And then, I traveled around. I moved to New Orleans, tattooed there for a while with Sailor Moses, and
cool.
tons of adventures there, all kinds of stuff. Then New Orleans.
What was Sailor Moses like?
Sailor Moses, we were partners. We ran a shop together for a couple of years in New Orleans. And we were great drinking buddies, and you know, yeah, it was, he was another sort of brother, mentor kind of guy, you know. I was still pretty young in the game,
Yeah.
even though I'd come up through Bob Shaw, you know, Sailor Moses had come up through Goldfield in San Francisco,
Oh, yeah, sure.
and Goldfield had a whole other approach to tattooing, much more artsy, which I liked because I wanted to develop something beyond just, you know, so there was
Yeah.
there was a, you know, a more artistic, you know, sort of influence coming to me through that, and we started doing things outside the box a little bit, you know, doing different kinds of designs that nobody, you know, it was like, you know, nowadays, I mean, it's like anything goes, but
Yeah.
back then, anything that was a little bit, you know, edgy was like, wow, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You know, this is crazy. And that was around the time when some of these real people started, you know, like innovative people started, you know, spreading their wings,
Yeah.
tattoo-wise. That was when sort of Ed Hardy emerged. That's when Bob Roberts started doing different kind of stuff. That's when the whole Cholo thing started happening. That's when, you know, Japanese stuff started, you know, filtering its way into the iconography through, you know, Sailor Jerry and Zeke Owen. You know, these were all people that I worked with and became friends with. Zeke Owen was like another sort of mentor to me and a friend, you know. And there was then that was when a whole sort of second or third generation of tattoo artists with a more modern point of perspective started to emerge.
To evolve it, yeah.
Yeah,
Because
so
up until that point, it had mostly been, like you said, Panthers, Skulls, very much traditional.
Right.
And it didn't really stray too much from that.
No, it didn't.
Because there wasn't too much outside influence in that.
No, there
It
was
just
nothing.
what it was,
And that's when these people started coming in, you know,
Yeah.
and I was right on the edge of that. So then there's Ed Hardy, then there's Bob Roberts, then there's, you know, the crossover to the Japanese guys, you
Yeah.
know, through Zeke and through, you know, Sailor Jerry legacy. And, you know, and I was in the, you know, in the middle of that, and then Spider Webb, you know, who everybody thought was a joke, but he published that book, Push It Ink, which was the first actual cover-to-cover tattoo book. And he had a whole other thing, and I wound up working with him for years too, running his shop. Man, I love that man, you know.
Yeah.
Even though he was not well respected by the, you know, real tattoo artists, he had his own philosophy and his own way of doing things, which heavily informed my sort of worldview in a lot of ways. You know, God rest his soul, he just passed away a few months ago. And he was a big, you know, big friend and a big influence on my sort of evolution, and, you know, not so much in the nuts and bolts artistic sense, but more in sort of like a philosophical approach to things as an artist, you know. But whatever, you know, it was like there was a lot going on, and there was all this stuff coming in, and then Greg Arns, you know, who was this iconic underground cartoonist, you know, came in and decided he wanted to tattoo, and, you know, I became great friends with him as well. So I was getting all this permission thrown at me, you know, through these associations to just take it to another level and start doing shit that nobody was doing.
Yeah.
And that's when, you know, then Leo Zaletta came along, and he was doing traditional, like, you know, South Pacific tribal representations. And I was like, well, I could do that, but I'm going to do that with my own approach. And I started doing abstract versions of the, you know, black and white tribal thing, but it wasn't following any, you know, like actual.
Just pattern work, abstract pattern work, I suppose.
Started doing abstract pattern work, you know, just non-representational abstract pattern work in a sort of, they called it tribal, but it was not tribal. It was, you know, urban.
Yeah.
You know, urban angst inspired, just non-representational pattern work, like you said, you know, and that caught on, especially when I moved to New York and I was working with Spider.
Is that when it started really taking off then, when you moved
People
to
hadn't
New
seen
York?
it. I mean, it was like, this is like, nobody's doing this. This is like something, wow, you can do that? Wow, I want a whole arm of just weird stuff, you know, and people were, you know, like I say, it was all underground in New York. It was underground, it was illegal, you couldn't have a real tattoo shop. So everybody was working by word of mouth and, you know, association and, you know, this and that. And people, like if people walked into a bar with a tattoo, fresh tattoo in New York, everybody'd be like, whoa, where'd you get that? You know, and then, you know, you'd be getting the phone call. So it got to a point in New York in the early 80s where the demand so outweighed the supply, because there was only maybe a half a dozen of us tattooing in New York, all underground, word of mouth. And everybody wanted a tattoo, especially in the summertime when the clothes come off, and you know, and everybody wanted a tattoo, and you couldn't get one, so they all had to come to us. And you know, I'd get 100 phone calls a day, and I'm like, okay, I can't tattoo all these fucking people, so let me pick the cream of the crop. Let me find the ones that want to pay the most, and the ones that want to let me have the most freedom to do something interesting on them. And I would just send all the hearts and flowers, you know, on their merry way, and I'd pick the guys that, you know, would be like, I saw this thing, you know, or they wanted something custom, or they were open to letting me just do my own thing on them, you know. So I managed to really get myself in a position where I could actually be creative and start experimenting with new ideas, and that just snowballed into a whole thing, and you know, and then it was just like, you know, then it started, I don't know, next thing you know, I get approached by Tattoo Magazine. Publisher wants me to make the world's first exclusively tattoo-oriented magazine, mainstream glossy magazine, so I started doing that, and then I, you know, going to convention, and this one thing led to another, and next thing you know, I'm like, you know, world famous before I even knew who the fuck I was. So, you know, then I'm on Letterman's show, then I'm getting invited to do all these prestigious things, and I'm like, woo, you know, like a fucking, you know, kid in a candy shop, you know, out of control, crazy, workaholic, doing art shows, inviting other tattoo artists in to these art shows, and, you know, started a movement. It started a fucking movement, you know, just right place, right time, and somehow things just snowballed into this whole thing.
When did you open Fun City then, Jonathan? When did that? So you moved to New York and you were working with Spider Web, and then,
I was working with Spider for my first couple of years in New York. Then I think I went back to Brazil for a bit. I'm just gonna sit this way because I got a bullet in my leg, and sometimes it hurts if I sit.
Oh, go for it. Put your feet in there.
Yeah, this is all right. This is good. So, so I went to New York from New Orleans. I've been working with Bob Shaw in Texas. Then, you know, there was the teary farewell when I said, I got to go off. I want to live in New Orleans. I'm sick of living in Houston. And Bob was like, I'll stay. You know, I was like, I got to go, Bob. And I went to New Orleans, worked with Sarah Moses for a couple of years. And then I decided I need to go to New York, city of my birth. And I went to New York. And right away it started. I was working in guys' apartments and tattooing the hell out of people. There was such a demand. And then somebody said, go see Spider. And I thought, Spider Web, I read his book. He was like a hero to me. So I went up there and saw him. I met with Spider. We fucking got drunk together and sniffed cocaine all night and just had a great old time, hit it off like brothers. And he handed me the keys to his shop and said, it's your place, you know, get to work, I'm going fishing. And I fucking stayed there and ran his shop for like a year. And that was interesting, because I mean, he already had like a clientele of like all kinds of crazy people. I mean, Andy Warhol would come up in there, you know. You know, Basquiat, you know, all these
because the art scene in New York at that time was like popping off.
And Spider was like he was a good promoter, man. He got all these people, you know, and people with money. And he was raping them, man. He was charging thousands of dollars for a little tattoo. You know, he knew how to promote his shit, you know. And he wasn't a great tattoo artist, but he was a visionary. I mean, technically speaking, he was a, you know, mediocre to, you know, not a great tattoo artist, but he had vision. God bless him, you know, he had vision, and he, you know, he saw things the way nobody dared see things, you know, and he could make it happen. He was a creator of scenes. So I learned a lot from him in that sense, you know. And so I worked with him for maybe a year and a half, and then at some point I don't know, people got in my ear and they were like, you got to go open your own
Do your
thing,
own thing.
go downtown, open your own thing, you're giving half your money to this guy,
Okay.
he's always drunk, whatever. I don't know, I was young and ambitious and I said, okay. And, he tried to sabotage me once I'd left and opened my own place.
Oh, really? Yeah.
I'd get death threats and,
Oh,
calls in the middle of the night and, fucking, shady people lurking around, Yeah, Spider, he tried to scare the shit out of me, didn't scare me,
Yeah.
That's when I started collecting guns, Yeah, I was pretty well armed in those days, so I was like, come on, bring it,
Yeah.
But, it was, so I opened some Fun City in the back of a like punk rock clothing store.
Nice.
Yeah, they rented me a little space in the back of their failing punk rock clothing store that wasn't really making any money, and they were junkies, and I was in the back tattooing, and in 1 week I made more money in the back of that fucking store than that store made in a year.
Yeah.
So I bought them out. I said, look, how much do you want? And just pack up your shit and go, here's some
I need
money.
a bigger waiting room.
yeah. So they took the money and ran. They took all their stuff, and I, bulletproofed all the windows with like plate, with like fucking, what do you call that stuff?
Plexiglass or whatever.
No, it was like iron.
Oh, bloody yeah.
Yeah, it was like iron doors, iron window. I just made the place into
Like a
a
fortress.
bulletproof fortress. And they moved out, and I turned the whole thing into this tattoo shop, and then, we just started tattooing day and night.
Wow.
It was me, Philip Blue came to work with me.
Cool.
Me and Philip worked side by side in that place for a couple of years, and it was booming, it was happening, and Philip was like a god of tattooing, and people would see the amazing work he was putting on people, and they were lining up. And he had his fucking clientele that wanted that incredible, precise Japanese style, wild style, genius work that he was doing.
Yeah.
And I was doing my own thing. I was doing all this kind of crazy, abstract, cubist inspired, just weird stuff. And, and also just custom pieces, whatever, We were just tattooing round the fucking clock over in there.
Was it just two of you? Was it just you
It
two?
was just the two of us.
Yeah.
But at one point, Philip moved on, and then it was just me again.
Yeah.
And I realized, fuck, I can only do so many tattoos a day, and especially the way I'm operating, I'm sending all the hearts and flowers away, and I'm just doing big pieces now.
Yeah.
I'm taking the fucking back pieces, the full arms, the fucking custom stuff, the kind of stuff I like to do. People that are paying good and educated and want real tattoos, because I'm building a portfolio of as a tattoo artist, I don't want to be sitting there doing hearts and flowers. I'm still trying to build a portfolio as a bona fide, player in the tattoo thing. So, but meanwhile, there's all this demand, and the supply is just one fucking guy that doesn't really want to do much of anything except what he wants to do.
Yeah.
So I said, well, you know what? I could take all this overflow and send it to my competitors, or I could open up another spot, put a few, good solid meat and potato tattoo guys in there, and take like 50% from them, and I could, compete with myself
Totally.
and get paid.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. I opened a spot down the road, down the street.
What's still called Fun City?
To this day.
Oh, wow.
To this day. So I was on 1st Street near the Bowery, 1st and 1st, and I opened Fun City on 8th Street, 8 blocks away on St. Mark's Place and 1st Avenue, and I just rented an apartment in there. We renovated it, just a little shithole apartment. We turned it into a tattoo shop with like 4 stations, and I just put a bunch of guys in there. Chris Garver was there. He was just starting out. I gave him his first job, I believe, or second job. And there was a Snake Eyes, Dan Palucci, and then over the years there was a bunch of people that came and went from that shop. So we had a proper walk-in tattoo shop there, even though it was still underground and illegal.
Yeah.
We still had a underground tattoo shop. there that was taking walk-ins. And I was just at my little boutique studio where I'd always been, and I tattooed the sort of elite stuff, and everybody wanted a tattoo. I just sent them over there.
Yeah.
And that place was cranking, man. They'd open at fucking 10 in the morning and close at 4 a.m. the next day.
Yeah.
And it was round the clock, and it was mayhem. And it was,
Wow.
eventually I wound up going over there and tattooing.
Yeah.
Because it was just so much fun.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you
Characters.
get lonely working with
Yeah. So I went and set up my own little station there.
Nice.
And, you know, it was just balls to the wall all day long, fucking crazy mayhem madness that you could imagine in the fucking most happening tattoo shop in New York City in the fucking early 90s. And, you know, we were fucking famous, man. I'd had the magazine for a few years, promoted the shit out of it. We were on television. We were in fucking David Letterman. We were like, you know, we were the fucking place to be.
Yeah.
It was, you know.
Because up to that point in New York, I suppose most of the shops had been more traditional based, hadn't they? Very much like not doing interviews, not doing TV stuff, probably more shunning that than anything, weren't they?
Yeah.
So you'd come in and seen the opportunity to use that and actually to your benefit, innit? Really?
Yeah, and I was a promoter.
Yeah.
I mean, I was hungry.
Yeah.
I was young-ish, ambitious, and, you know, hungry. You know, I'd lived in the fucking slums of Brazil, you know, I'd gone, you know, for weeks without fucking food at times, you know. I come from, you know, I'd seen some fucking hard times, so when I come to the fucking land of opportunity, I'm like fucking a dog with two dicks. I'm gonna take what I can get, you know, sell tattoos, you know, the fucking, you know, I always told these guys that work for me, don't price the fucking tattoo, price the fucking customer. I never had prices on the wall.
Yeah.
A guy from the neighborhood walk in and get a fucking tattoo for $35, and then 2 hours later, a guy wearing fucking alligator shoes and a Rolex watch would walk in and get the same tattoo for $500.
Yeah.
And that's how I did it. And I tried to teach these guys to be pirates, but that didn't work out. Not most Americans don't have the stomach for that kind of piracy, but, you know, for me, it was a way of life.
Okay.
So we did real well, you know, real well at the time. And it was in the public eye and it was good, but I got burnt out on it, you know.
Okay.
I got burnt out on everything, you know. I went back to using drugs. I was living life in the fast lane. I was running around with, you know, movie stars and celebrities and fucking, you know, Hell's Angels and, you know, mobsters and just party people and just all kinds of.
Do you think that would have happened had you have not pushed with the publicity side of the shop and you'd have?
It would have happened no matter what, because it was in my destiny. It was in my blood, really. I come from a family of alcoholics. You know, my mother's side is my mother's side, her father was a Romani gypsy from Romania.
Yeah.
And, you know, full-on gypsy and a fucking horrible drunkard.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I grew up with that, you know, that generational curse that eventually would have to, you know, flourish one way or the other. And so, you know, the drink led to the drugs, led to the life in the fast lane.
Being around all those people,
all
doing
the
same
fucking
thing.
parties every night, running around, you know, private jets with Johnny Depp and hanging out backstage with, you know, Iggy Pop and everybody else. You know, it's just like life in the fucking fast lane. And, you know, like they say, if the drugs don't get you, the lifestyle will, and it all just becomes part of this big, you know, everything just turned into, you know, mayhem, and, you know, I almost died at some point, you know, and that's when I got sober, and, you know, that's, I guess about 21 and a half years ago, I got clean and sober and never picked up another drink again, you know, and, you know, that became the sort of portal opening into sort of like this psychic change and a big spiritual awakening, and through that, you know, I became very involved in, you know, philosophical issues and wanting to clean up a lot of the wreckage that my life had accumulated over all these years of adventures, and, ambition and, you know, just ruthless, you know, money grubbing.
Doing some self-work and stuff.
Yeah, a lot of self-work.
Yeah.
I mean, to the point where I had to step away from tattooing, where I said, okay, this is not going to be part of my life anymore. I need to go inward and start working on myself. And then, you know, and that's when I reemerged as a writer.
Right.
And I just, you know, moved back to Brazil, took the money and ran, went back to Brazil, bought a little place there, and just holed up and started writing like my fucking life depended on writing to purge my soul of so much encumbrances.
Like your therapy.
Yeah,
yeah.
That's when I started writing, you know, just day and fucking night, you know, produced like, you know, 4 books, published them all without even trying. People came to me and was like, you know, what are you doing? Wrote this book, let me see it. Wow, can I show it to a publisher? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
And then one thing led to another, and then, you know, I became a writer, you know, and that became the focus of my, you know, the next 2 decades of my life. But, you know, I realized I'd never get away from being a tattoo artist.
No.
You know, my father told me that. My father had done the same thing, interestingly enough. It seems to run genetically.
Right.
I was never close with my father, but there's a genetic tie that you cannot get away from, I guess, because my father was, you know, iconic, super famous, you know, musician.
Yeah.
I mean, and he quit at the height of his fucking career, saw the corruption in the music industry and said, fuck all y'all, and moved to fucking Spain and holed up in an anonymous little fishing village and started writing books.
Wow.
Never made any money, never, you know, he never could get away from being who he was. And he told me, you know, no matter what you do, you're always going to be Jonathan Shaw, the tattoo guy.
Yeah,
they're never going to let you out of that box.
No, especially because you reached such a high, because you've made such a name for yourself associated with tattooing. It was hard to kind of break away from that, wasn't it?
It was a bit of a shock to me that like, wow, you know, they never let you go, you know. But then again, it became kind of cool because, you know, I could write a book that's deeply introspective and deeply, you know, like a character study and a sort of metaphor for the whole fucking human condition as a whole, you know, and yet I'd have to title it Scab Vendor Confessions of a Tattoo Artist, so tattoo artists would be like, oh, we got to read this, it's about tattooing, but it's not.
No.
So it's kind of like, hey, you know, come on in. Oh, well, it's not what you think it is.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I opened the door though, but yeah.
Maybe, I don't care. I don't care. I wrote it for myself. You know, people who get it loved it. It got rave reviews all over the place, book tours all over the world. You know, took me to interesting places, put me in contact with really amazing, you know, brilliant people and whatever, you know. I mean, now it's spawned a movie.
Yeah.
They've been working on a documentary about me, loosely sort of inspired on my books for the last 7 years. Now it's in completion. The fucking thing's going to screen at a big film festival in Europe next week.
Yeah.
And from there, we'll see. It goes to Netflix, it goes to Amazon, it goes to theaters. I don't know, but it's a pretty good little movie.
Cool.
I mean, it's, you know, and it traces a lot of these happenings, you know, and I'm just proud to, you know, have had the opportunity to live all these lives in one life.
To have it all to write down. It's interesting that you've almost gone full circle, isn't it? Because you started off as a writer, and that was your creative outlet, particularly in times that you were struggling as well.
Yeah.
And then you've gone through this life, you've almost sort of reached a level of destruction through tattooing, but then you've come back round to the writing again to help almost as a therapy.
It is, you know, I look at everything from this point of view because I'm about to be 70 years old and looking back on my life now.
Yeah.
I see it, you know, you can always see the, you know, sort of divine plan in retrospect, but you can never see what's coming.
Nah.
Only God could see that shit, you know. So, but it takes me back to remembering when I was this fucking junkie teenager looking for, you know, I was just a scream looking for a mouth.
Yeah.
Just didn't know, you know, whether to shit or go blind.
Yeah.
And I'm hanging out with Charles Bukowski and we're getting drunk together and I'm showing him some of my fucked up, you know, poetic rants on paper and he just throws the shit across the table and he goes, kid, you're never going to be shit as a writer until you go out and get a fucking life.
Wow.
You need a story to tell, otherwise you're just jerking yourself off.
Totally.
And I was like, I got offended at the time. We even got in a fist fight, drunken fist fight in his apartment. That's a whole other story. But the point is, I actually, in retrospect, once again, I look back on those words as probably, definitely, without a doubt, the best advice I've ever received as a writer. I don't know about as an artist, but as a writer, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
Because writing, what are you going to write about? It comes only from experience.
You've got to bleed to have the wounds to talk about, haven't you?
Hello.
Yeah.
Exactly, man. So, that's what I proceeded to do. I went out and got some kind of a fucking life. And, it was only after I became like 48 years old that I got sober enough to collect some, remnants of my wits and start writing this stuff down, because then I actually had a baggage of experience that I could refer to and write about.
Yeah.
And I had to. Not only could I, but if I didn't, I would have blown my fucking brains out, because I was that crazy. It's like getting sober after a year of, a lifetime of drunkenness and drug abuse is not an easy task. And to do that, I had to really subject myself to some deep spiritual, emotional, mental surgery that could only be done, in my case, through the use of the spoken word or the written word. And that's when I had to go back and start retracing my steps and try to, find some cosmic, sense of purpose in all this fucking random experience, And that was when I, was able to actually put on my hat as a writer and say, okay, now I can do this. Not only can I do this, but if I don't do it, I'm fucking gonna commit some terrible crime against myself or, the universe. So that's where that came from. But so.
Did it help having the tattoo magazine, because it allowed you to do writing in a way?
That was the only time when I was so deeply involved in the tattoo world at that time. I was going to all the conventions. I was, tattooing full time. I was running, at one point there, we had 4 tattoo shops in New York. We had 4 fun cities. We had one we had my little boutique shop. Then we had the one on St. Mark's. Then we had another one over on McDougal Street. And then we had another one over in Queens in like a Hispanic neighborhood, where we were just tattooing like gang members and basically and stuff. So we had 4 shops running. I must have had 20 people working, with 4 managers, and then at least 5 or 6 tattoo artists in each shop running shifts, because my philosophy was always like money, money, money. We're paying rent 24 hours a day, so we're not closing before 4 a.m. We'll do the morning guys, we'll do the cops, the firemen, the garbage men, and everybody else, and then, in the afternoon, we'll do the college kids, and then in the evening, we'll get all the fucking drunks and take their money too, So this is like, we're paying rent 24 hours a day, so we're gonna have fucking 3 shifts in each shop, and everybody's gonna be working their fucking ass off, and it's just a sea of ink and blood and fucking, guts rolling out the door, So that's how we did it in New York, in the 90s. And so I was, right in the middle of it. And meanwhile, we're tattooing celebrities, rock stars, all these people in and out. And it was like a real whirlwind of just, all kinds of.
Did you tattoo Iggy Pop? Did you say?
Iggy was and is a really close friend, and he was with us through the whole time and everything. And he was a frequent visitor at Fun City, and he'd hang around and watch me work, and we just, I went on tour with him just to fucking hang out. And, we were really close at that time, during those times, and, stayed kind of close over the years. I mean, he's family, I haven't talked to him for a while, but Iggy's family. But actually, out of that whole crew of celebrities that Iggy was kind of a part of, there was me, there was Johnny Depp, there was Jim Jarmusch, there was Iggy, and a few other, marginal hangers-on. John Waters would come around, all these fucking people, Kate Moss, I mean, you name it, they were Marilyn Manson, they were all coming around. But of that core crew of me, Johnny Depp, Iggy, and Jarmusch, Iggy was the only one that never got the tattoo.
Oh wow, I did wonder that.
Yeah, we all got the same tattoos. I got it somewhere on me. I don't even remember, but it's like a skull and crossbones with the words "Death is certain," and it came from an old tattoo flash, an old tattoo flash sheet by somebody, Bert Graham or somebody. Yeah, it was a funky ass old pirate skull with crossbones, and around it was the words "Death is certain."
Oh, I love it.
And Iggy was sitting in the shop one day, and he was going through all my collection of tattoo flash and just like loving it.
Yeah.
And he came across that tattoo, and he was like, "Oh man, that's really cool." You know, I really like that one. If I ever got a tattoo, I'd want something like that. Yeah. You know, and we're all sitting there and going like, Iggy's gonna get the fucking tattoo. So we all got the same tattoo the same night. I tattooed it on myself. I tattooed it on Johnny Depp. I tattooed it on Jarmusch. And Iggy never got the fucking thing. And we all wear the same skull ring too.
Yeah.
I had, my cousin was a jeweler, and he made these awesome skull rings for all of us. And you know, we sort of formed the Death is Certain Club, and we all got the skull rings. I think Iggy lost his skull ring in a fucking in a mosh pit where he stage dove into a crowd and somebody slipped it off his fingers. And I think I gave him another one, but I think he probably lost that one too.
Yeah.
Johnny's got so many fucking rings on his hand, I don't even
know if he wears it.
You know, and yeah, Jim still wears his, and I'm not wearing mine because I live in Brazil and it's cold, and I don't want to get shot in the knee again. So
yeah.
But yeah, so that he never got the tattoo.
Yeah, I did wonder whether he had a tattoo. How did the collecting thing come about then? Because I know that there's probably quite a few people listening to this that also have your tattoo books that you've been putting out lately.
Yeah, well, being back in the day with Bob Shaw at Bert Grimm's shop, and then going on from there to, you know, be around all these old timers that I, you know, was associated with through Bob, and later on through the magazine. I had to go around the world, and you know, everywhere I went, I would always look up the old timers and interview them and get to hang out with them.
For the magazine?
Yeah, for the magazine. Yeah. But even before that, I was with Bob Shaw, and I always loved the old flash, and I'd see them taking it down off the wall because it wasn't current anymore and putting up newer stuff, and this stuff would go in boxes in the back room at the Pike. And one day I said to Bob, "What are you going to do with all that stuff? It's just lurking back there, you know, collecting mold and dust." And he was like, "That shit, we'll never use that again." And I was like, "Can I have it?" And he was like, "Yeah, take it out of here." You know, and I fucking piled, you know, boxes of this stuff, all old Bert Grimm stuff, Bob Shaw stuff by other people that had worked in that shop, you know. It was all just piled up in these moldy old boxes in the back room. And Bob was like, "Yeah, get it out of here. You can have it. We don't got no use for it no more, you know." And I took all these boxes and loaded them into my fucking car and took them and put them, you know, put them in a safe place. And then years later, when I'm doing the fucking magazine, you know, it was a mission of mine to always give respect to the old timers and teach some fucking tattoo history to these people that are coming into the thing and reading this magazine. They don't know shit from Shinola about their own history. It's an occult sort of, you know, lost thing. And so I was like, let me use this opportunity to give some respect to the guys who pioneered this fucking shit for us, the guys who paved the road that we're walking. These guys, these new guys don't even know who these fuckers are, you know, this is a crime. So I started going out there, and every issue I went and found some old timer that was just sitting in a forgotten shop somewhere, and just went and did kind of like what you're doing, you know. I interviewed them and put their pictures and their names and everything and their whole story in this fucking glossy magazine and sent it out into the world.
I remember seeing the one with Jack Dracula you did.
Dracula?
I've got that, and I scanned that in so that I always had it, because I think it's like one of the best. It's one of the best interviews I've ever read, because I think the questions you asked him were great, but I also think that just like the way it was laid out, where you put some of his drawings in there and bits of his flash and old photos of him from being in the carnival.
And then the current photos?
Just the whole thing, the current photos, and just like the whole thing just really worked, and it like really like took my attention and kind of is partly what inspired me wanting to do these interviews. Yeah, to be honest, was like reading that Jack Dracula one.
How great!
Yeah,
and that's one I hadn't even remembered. There were so many of them.
Yeah,
I interviewed and featured a lot of these. I mean, of course, the first ones that went in were Bob Shaw, Colonel Todd,
I've got the Bob Shaw,
Lyle Tuttle, name guys. But then I started going after guys that only people in the tattoo business knew about, and there was Coney Island Freddie, and there was Jack Dracula. I don't even remember how many other. Then I started going to India and interviewing totally obscure street tattoo artists in Bombay, and then I'd go to Japan and go to these conventions and interview Horiyoshi, and all. But I just always wanted to have these people in the public view because I mean that's the respect that I learned from guys like Bob, who had learned from guys like Bert Graham, who had learned from God knows who, and it's like a lineage. And that has to be present. Because nowadays, tattooing has become like, fucking nail salons. There's one on every fucking corner. And I bet you 8 out of 10 of these fly-by-night, opportunistic kind of tattoo businesses, they don't have any idea of the lineage what tattooing, how it evolved or anything. They just know they got their fucking tattoo kit in the mail and they're going to set up.
Away they go.
And next thing you know, of course, there's a whole other generation of tattoo artists who are really fascinated with the art and the origins and the history, and they're giving honor to their lineage. Thank God for guys like yourself. And your whole generation. There's some real serious people who could tattoo circles around, us, of the previous generation. But it's not just about the quality of the work; it's the quality of the, of the tradition.
Yeah.
And there's those that give that, that homage to, where they come from. It's almost like these kids who are setting up shop all over the place and tattooing, it's almost like they're bastards, I mean, in the true sense of the word, they're bastard children. They have no parents, they have no lineage, they just sprung up like fucking mushrooms out of the fucking cow shit,
I've never thought of it like that before,
Yeah, they have no roots, and that's cool, whatever, they're like fucking cheap barber shops or, nail salons or, whatever, massage parlors, it's like, who cares? We're just making money and taking it home to, feed our family or whatever. But it's kind of sad to people who really have a deep love for this weird, sort of world that has roots going way back to carnivals and
totally.
Forget about all the anthropological roots and stuff, but there's a whole lineage in this thing, and it's
with the interviews, were you doing them? How are you doing those? Were you writing to these people? Were you meeting them in person?
I'd meet them at conventions, or we had mutual friends, or somebody in the tattoo biz would come up to me and go, "Hey, you should go talk to Joe Dragon, in Skadunk, Washington, or whatever, or some other interesting tattoo artists, even contemporary tattoo artists that weren't really known outside of their little area. Guys like Dave Lum.
Yeah, sure.
This crazy fucking visionary, wild man. What an amazing fucking dude, man. I mean, the stuff he was doing was so far out of the box, and I just had to meet this guy. And, there was all kinds of guys like that. It was a real interesting, sort of cross-section of weird magical characters, that you come across through just association with others, and so it was a lot of word of mouth, and I think it was mostly just being in the game and being around it and hearing about some guy out there, and you'd go find him, and Stanley and Walter Moskowitz,
Oh, nice.
all these kind of guys, so there was and I believe I interviewed George Bone.
Cool.
I'm pretty sure. I can't, my memory's shot, it's only when I really get alone and sit down and just go into that writing bubble that things start to come back to me, because just sitting here trying to recollect.
I mean, you've interviewed hundreds of people, if not thousands probably at this stage, haven't you, through those magazines, so.
It was so much fun.
Yeah, I bet.
Because it was a rich tapestry of, of characters and ideas and art and visions and ideologies, and there was all kinds of crazy people in this thing, and I mean, I've always been real fascinated with the just the human condition, and getting to meet all these strange curmudgeons in their own little universe. It was really what an honor, what a privilege, to be able to document some of that stuff and give respect to that stuff for posterity. It put me in a unique position, and of course there was a lot of fucking sour grapes and jealous haters and people in the tattoo art, business. I mean, I remember Bob Shaw telling me back in the day, way back in the day, because I was young and enthusiastic and I wanted to meet everybody and I wanted to be part of the community and, all this kind of thing. For me, it was like, oh yeah, now I've arrived, And Bob was like, take it easy, kid, you don't understand. These tattoo artists are like a bunch of jealous old whores. They'll pull you down, man.
Right.
And I didn't know what he was. Of course, I disregarded the admonition and went out and tried to make friends with everybody. And once I started crawling out of the bucket, all the crabs down below wanted to haul me back down in the bucket and, eat me alive. There was a lot of haters. There still is. There always will be.
Yeah.
But I always say, if you ain't pissing somebody off, you ain't doing a very good job at it. So, haters will hate. God bless them, I mean, there's something there for our edification.
Yeah, definitely.
And the quality, you can judge a man by the quality of his haters or the lack thereof.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Have you got any more books planned? We got the documentary coming out, which
the documentary's coming out. That's going to take me in whatever direction, the universe so deems appropriate. The books, right now, I am in progress with the third book of the Scab Vendor series. The first two books have been published. The first, I've got 3 books published. The first one is a non-tattoo related novel called Narcissa, Our Lady of Ashes, and that's like a dark, dark journey down into the depths of addiction and drug culture in the slums of South America, with the featured protagonist being a teenage crack whore and a middle-aged gypsy, her sidekick, and their insane, dysfunctional, violent adventures in the underworld, the criminal underworld of Rio de Janeiro. That's a hardcore book. It's a very hardcore book. It received a lot of critical acclaim and has been translated into many different languages and published all over the world. And never really, kind of bestseller or anything, but it was a cult classic. Yeah. And Johnny Depp used to even fantasize about making it into a movie before he became world famous. As a pirate character that he kind of stole half of that persona from me. And I've got the tattoo on my arm by him to prove it. Where it says OCJ here. That stands for Original Captain Jack. And,
really?
And that's, he used to call me Captain Jack the Pirate 10 years before that fucking movie was even a glint in the screenwriter's eye. So,
you heard it here.
So yeah, that's all coming out in the movie, Cool. And, so the first book was not relevant to tattooing at all. It was relevant to my soul's journey as a recovered drug addict and somebody, living on the wild side in South America. The next book, which is pretty much my memoir, the first book of an ongoing memoir series called Scab Vendor, Confessions of a Tattoo Artist. Robert Crumb actually did the cover art.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, I've seen the cover art.
Yeah, the cover art was like, what a fucking thing. I mean, that was one of the big feathers in my cap in life, was to have my hero as a, teenage stoned out teenage kid reading Zap comics, to have Robert fucking Crumb illustrate the cover of my book just out of friendship. What the fuck? How did this happen to me, So that was the first book, Scab Vendor, Confessions of a Tattoo Artist. The second book is Confessions of a Tattoo Artist, part 2, or book 2. It's called Homeward Bound.
Cool.
And that all gets into the beginning of my tattoo
Nice.
adventures. That's tattooing, traveling in South America as a sort of upcoming wannabe tattoo artist, and that only takes me to like my 22nd year of life. So
there's a few more left.
There's a lot more books to be written.
Cool.
God willing, I would live long enough to complete the series. I don't see it, but you never know. Maybe
Amazing.
that's why the movie's coming out. So maybe I can get a few more interviews in before God calls me home. I don't know, but yeah, I've got the 3rd book in progress.
Nice.
And I certainly have an outline for all the books. I mean, I know I have a general skeleton for the trajectory of all the books. It's just now a matter of finding the time to sit down and keep writing them.
Yeah.
There's also a screenplay that I wrote that pretty much I'm using as an outline for the ongoing book series. So, we'll see where it all goes.